Hi, I'm Alette Green, and I am here to tell you about this brand new locally produced series right here on WHUT TV, Vocal Point. Vocal Point is going to show you some of the stories and issues that impact our local community, from child abuse prevention to suicide prevention. And we're going to bring in people who will share their personal stories. And together with a studio audience, we'll make sure that we answer your questions and give you the resources that you need to help you and your community. So join us for this brand new series, Vocal Point, right here on WHUT TV. Stay tuned for our first program in the Vocal Point series, Confronting Child Abuse, Cherishing Childhood. Join us as we get to the point right here on Vocal Point on WHUT TV. Hello and thanks for joining us. I'm Alette Green. Children who experience child abuse and neglect are 59% more likely to be arrested as a juvenile, 28% more likely to be arrested as an adult, and 30% more likely to commit violent crime. Every 10 seconds, a report of child abuse is made. More than 5 children die every day as a result of child abuse. Child abuse occurs at every socioeconomic level, across ethnic and cultural lines, within all religions, and at all levels of education. Today, along with our studio audience, we'll take a look at how to define child abuse, what resources are available, as well as outline other services and things that we can do with a group of distinguished local panelists who have joined us to share their different perspectives. We'll also hear a personal story of survival as we delve into this very important topic. Join us as WHUT gives a voice to combating child abuse and cherishing childhood. Joining me today, Dr. Tyish Hall-Brown, clinical science instructor at Howard University, and she can share her expertise on the clinical effects of child abuse on victims. Michelle Booth Cole, executive director of Safe Shores, the DC Children's Advocacy Center. She is here to discuss the child abuse issue and how to recognize it. Roger Caniff is a fellow within the National Center for Prosecution of Child Abuse and will help us understand the criminal justice system's response to child abuse. And lastly, Albert Chesley is a retired NFL player and adult supervisor, an adult survivor, that is, of child sexual abuse. Al suffered in silence for decades and now has become an advocate for child abuse prevention. We welcome everyone to our panel. Let's start by getting right to the point with some insight from our panelists. From there, we'll open this conversation up to our studio audience. So let's take it from the top by defining child abuse. It's such a big, broad topic. Michelle, you first. What is your definition of child abuse, and how does Safe Shores factor into helping these children in need?
Sure. Well, there are different kinds of child abuse. There's child physical abuse, child sexual abuse, neglect.
Mm-hmm.
Safe Shores primarily deals with child physical and sexual abuse, and we define child sexual abuse as any kind of sexual contact between an adult and a minor, as well as sexual contact between two minors when one exerts power over the other. And then that also includes non-contact acts, voyeurism, exhibitionism, forcing children to look at things, pornography. So there's a wide range of acts and behaviors that constitute child sexual abuse. And Safe Shores has a model that's meant to address abuse without further traumatizing the children. So we follow the Children's Advocacy Center model,
Mm-hmm.
which means that rather than have a child have to talk to multiple adults when there's an outcry of abuse, an allegation of abuse, we bring all those adults who are involved in investigating that case to the Children's Advocacy Center. And then the child talks to a trained forensic interviewer, and then all the adults, whether it's law enforcement, prosecution, child protective services, medical professionals, mental health, they can funnel their questions to that child through that trained interviewer.
And so with this model, the idea is not to re-traumatize the child over and over again by having him or her tell the story to several different people.
Absolutely.
And so that is a benefit to the child and in the investigatory process.
It's both, right. It's a direct service to the child to make sure that they're not further traumatized by the investigation. It's also to streamline the process of the investigation. You break down silos. You have agencies working together on behalf of the child and their family. And so you have people sharing information, breaking down lines of communication, and facilitating the investigation. The other thing that this model has in mind is a comprehensive and coordinated response. So we don't just deal with the investigative aspect, but we have mental health services, victim services. It also takes in mind the medical need as well. So we want to meet all the needs of that child victim when they're brought to the Children's Advocacy Center.
And we'll get more into that and also into the investigative part of it in just a bit. I do want to continue to break down child abuse. Dr. Brown, let me bring you in. Neglect, the most common form of child abuse, correct?
Right, it is.
And often the most underreported.
Exactly. So, and some of it is people not realizing what what constitutes neglect, but it is the most commonly reported or commonly occurring, and it can, like you said, happen at any socioeconomic level, but it is very prevalent in those who have low resources and in kind of poverty-stricken areas. DC itself is has high rates of neglect. And you'll see children presenting to clinics who haven't taken showers, haven't eaten, or have had medical neglect where they've had medical conditions that need to be taken care of, but parents haven't sought treatment or taken them for treatment. So it is pretty common, unfortunately.
Most people would be surprised, I think, to learn about neglect being such a big, more commonly occurring form of child abuse, because sometimes you just don't pay attention to it as a form of child abuse. It doesn't register all the time.
Exactly.
I was saying earlier to you, when I was growing up, there were kids in my classroom that I look back on now, and yes, they were abused. The hygiene was off.
Right.
I think a lot of obese children are now classified as victims of child abuse and that sort of thing. So it's something we really got to turn the radar on.
Exactly. And I think, helping teachers and other parents and people who are working with children to recognize those signs is going to be an important issue. Like you said, kids who are coming to school who are having difficulties with their classwork because they're falling asleep or because they're not able to pay attention in class, kids who maybe come to school in the winter without coats, kids who aren't showering, different warning signs or kind of risk factors that we can look at and educate teachers and others who are working with children to notice. I think that is an important component to preventing child abuse.
And certainly there are different degrees, mild, moderate, severe, classifications of abuse. What would you say about each level? Obviously, we know when we get to moderate and severe, that's huge. But when you have a mild classification for abuse, how do you deal with that? As a parent, as a teacher, as someone recognizing, or as a family member recognizing this, is it, you step in now before it gets to the next level, but people don't register it as a big deal often because it doesn't seem so severe.
And I think any type of abuse should be looked at as severe. So anytime you have any thought or feeling that a child is being abused, whether it be through neglect or physical or sexual abuse, I think it's important to report that and seek help and try to do what you can for that child. I know it's hard to hear that there's a moderate or a low level of abuse.
Really is.
I think any level of abuse is something that's important for us to tackle and to try and help the child so that they're not going through any type of abuse.
Al Chesley, let me bring you in here, because people, when they hear about child sexual abuse, you get much more emotionally charged about it. Tell me about your story, because you grew up, you became the successful NFL football player, and now you are an advocate for children. But start where this story begins for you.
Okay, like you said, I am a former NFL player. I had the great honor to play with the Philadelphia Eagles and the Chicago Bears. Once even had the great honor to play in the Super Bowl. But I'm here to talk about child abuse and my experience as a victim, as a 13-year-old boy growing up here in Washington, D.C. I was sexually abused by a Washington, D.C. police officer at the age of 13, and it went on until I went away to college. And at that time, it was devastating to me, and I had, you talked about abuse with parents and things like that. I had none of that. I had two great parents, a mother and father in the home, a great, loving family, but little did they know the revered police officer down the street that we all looked up to was a predator and a child
Was this somebody assigned to your community, a neighbor who happened to be a police officer? Who was this person?
He lived in Southeast Washington, where the abuse occurred at also, but he was, I don't know his function with the police department. I just know he had the badge, a gun, the police car. And he was always around. He showed up on the football field when I went to high school. He was always around. He was accepted by the coaches. He walked the halls freely in the schools. He was just in the neighborhood. And when he approached me, the time that I was first abused was when I was leaving my home on Potomac Avenue in Southeast, walking to Eastern Branch Boys Club. Back then, that was a police boys club. And he would always be parked at the same spot on the corner. And I turned him down several days. He asked me, did I need a ride? It was only 3 blocks, and I routinely walked that route. And unfortunately, one day he insisted that I get in his car forcefully.
And of course, what 13-year-old is going to say no to a police officer?
Yeah, that was a hard pill to swallow when I look back on it, but the years I've suffered for decades in silence, not knowing why, it happened, but I thought I would take it to my grave, and I'm glad I'm here on this panel and speaking out to so that this won't happen to any other kids. And I just want to say, if there's any parent or youth out there listening and that have been abused, just know that it's never the kid's fault. And I didn't know that. I had a college education and all, and I lived for decades thinking it was my fault. And
you thought it was your fault?
Thought it was my fault.
Did you think you were the only one that it was happening to back then?
Well, I knew it wasn't the only one. I wasn't the only one it was happening to, because he had scrapbooks full of other kids when he took me to his place. So I know there was hundreds of other kids that he abused. So I know that wasn't the case, but he insisted that I be quiet about it, and it seemed like whenever he would approach me, I had no power over him. I was just powerless, and all I could do was just, I was kind of under that spell, and I knew he had a picture of me too, and I was kind of afraid to make it to high levels. I was always worried that these pictures would come back and haunt me, so I didn't want to become too successful, for some reason. And
is that why you didn't tell your mom and dad right away?
Well, I just knew it was something wrong. I felt so bad, so ashamed, and I just couldn't. I didn't have the ability to. In my 13-year-old mind, I was incapable of processing what had happened to me, and consequently, I suffered in silence for years. And I remember being a very angry young kid, and my brothers used to kid me about and gave me the nickname of Mad Dog. We laugh about it now, and I found sports as an outlet, and I could take that aggression out on people in sports, and I would get applauded for it. And the coaches liked the tenacity, and they were trying to teach the killer instinct to some kids, but they had to try to take a little bit away from me, because I kept getting thrown out of games, and I couldn't contribute to my team's performance from the sideline from getting thrown out. But child abuse is just the most devastating crime that can be committed on a kid.
I want to bring in Roger because you're on the prosecutory side of this, trying to lock up the bad guys. And you hear a story like this and everyone reacts, oh my goodness, we've got to lock up these bad guys. Talk about how you work to effectively bring these people to justice, these perpetrators.
Well, everything depends, unfortunately, on a disclosure. The short answer is I work with individuals like Michelle. I work with phenomenal people who have developed child advocacy
It has
centers.
to be a team
Absolutely.
work
the team,
kind of thing.
Yeah. The team model is really what has blossomed in recent years, and we have seen so much success from it, not only nationwide, but spreading around the world,
Yeah.
that all really good departments and communities are adopting it. And as Michelle described, the Child Advocacy Center within the community becomes, and they are sprouting, thank God, everywhere. Many, many, many communities are pouring resources into them and opening them. Of course, Safe Source is one of the best. And it allows for a one-stop shop, basically, in order for the child to be responded to competently and compassionately by the system. The other term that we often use when we talk about prosecuting child abuse is the multidisciplinary team, or the MDT. So the MDT consists of police, prosecution, a medical response, and also the advocacy response, victim advocates, victim witness assistance folks, individuals who work in child protection on the civil side. So that sort of, and then probably a couple other individuals that I'm leaving out, oftentimes people from the faith community, from the schools. So the MDT can be as large or as small as it needs to be depending on the circumstances. But it's the MDT combined, or taking shape within a child advocacy center, a CAC, that really provides the best model. But it's, unfortunately, it's such an honor to be next to this man. His courage coming forward, and it took him decades, as he said.
Sure.
Sadly, that's almost always the case. Very, very few children reveal, particularly with sex abuse. I mean, again, as we discussed, there are different forms of child abuse, but when it comes to child sexual abuse in particular, and particularly with males, very, very few of them disclose. So sadly, we can only deal with what's disclosed either accidentally, if somebody discovers it, or purposefully, if the child comes forward. And unfortunately, we don't see many of those disclosures. When we do, thankfully now, we have the CAC model, we have an MDT model, and we're doing it better than we ever have.
Yeah.
We still have a long way to go, but we're doing it better than we ever have.
So let me bring you in, Dr. Brown, and you, Michelle, to tell me how you spot a case of suspected child abuse, especially when many times the scars, the bruises are invisible to the naked eye.
So there's, the main thing's a change in behavior. Like was mentioned earlier, maybe being irritable or being more aggressive than they had been in the past. A change in grades, so someone who was a A student, B student, suddenly failing classes. You could have kind of a regression or a loss of skills that they've had previously. So for young kids who may have been potty trained, starting to wet the bed or wetting during the day. So, behavioral changes are a really big component, I think, to recognizing that something's going on and then investigating further from that point. In the case of neglect, like we mentioned earlier, just things that don't seem right. So a child who's coming in, consistently, who has an odor, or who's not dressed properly, or is famished, or is falling asleep in school. Those are all kind of warning signs. And I think one thing that adults and teachers and things can do is, if you feel that something's off, investigate it. If it's not perfect, that's great. But if there is something, you've saved a child, you've helped a child. So I think we should err more on the side of helping than to be more conservative and say, well, I think things will be okay if I just let it be.
And then that you have the fear of some adults of making a report, and it turns out that it really isn't a case of child abuse, and then you think, oh my goodness, I've gotten this person in trouble, this parent, or taking this child through some sort of ordeal, when we really do need to err on the side of caution, because the child is the most important thing here.
Well, and that's the exception. I mean, the fact is, there is a system in place to allow the investigation to happen, and unless adults report when they have a reasonable suspicion of abuse, because that's the standard, then you don't give an opportunity for that investigation to take place. So, as you've been saying, you have to err on the side of safety, err on the side of the child, and the fact is, it's adults' responsibility to keep kids safe. And like Al said, only 10% of kids come forward. So we're only seeing a small portion of the universe of child victims. And in Safe Shores, we see about 700 children a year.
700 children a year. Yeah. And you believe what's the prevalence of this in terms of, what do you think is out here?
Well, the national statistics tell us that 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 10 boys will be sexually abused by their 18th birthday. So that's a public health crisis, that's a criminal justice crisis, that's a public safety crisis. But we don't talk about it in that scope, and we don't talk about it that broadly.
You also, Al mentioned that his victimizer was a police officer. And institutions, let's talk about the institutions where, predators lurk, and how you guys have to tackle and break down those walls. Dr. Brown, I would think that when there's a cop who is an abuser or a priest, I mean, it's just so much more difficult for a child because we're taught to trust these people, but yet many of the predators are lurking in some of our more respected institutions.
Right. They're in respected institutions, as you said, but also caregivers and parents. I think all of that is really hard to deal with. And there are evidence-based therapies that are out there to help support the child and support the families and support the parents in general, the non-offending parents, to deal with everything that's going on and to deal with their cognitions or thoughts. Is it my fault? Did I bring this on myself?
Yes.
Should I have known? Should I have done something earlier? To also deal with their emotions, to identify the maladaptive emotions, and help them kind of look at it from a different viewpoint. So I think tackling it from various levels is important to help them to not feel that it was on them, to not feel the guilt, and to not...
And when do we start talking to our children? How young is...
I think as early as you can, and you do it in different ways. So you may not say the same thing to a 3 or 4-year-old that you would say to a 13 or 14-year-old. But you talk about safe people, you talk about people that they can trust, and you talk about giving them an outlet, giving them an open invitation to talk to you if something happens to them that they're uncomfortable with, whether it be something they're not sure about, because sometimes they don't have the language to describe how they're feeling or what happened, but giving them that openness that they can talk to you no matter what's going on, and that they have your support. I think sometimes children also feel that if I tell mom or daddy, they won't believe me, and knowing that,
or they'll be angry.
Yeah, or they'll be angry at me, exactly. And letting them know that you're there to support them and that they can tell you anything, I think, is a huge first step.
One of those big institutions is family and close friends.
Right.
And that's a really tough one, and it's very pervasive.
It is pervasive. I think Al's experience is pretty typical. The fact is that predators don't just groom children, they also groom adults. Their goal is to raise the comfort level of adults so they can get access to children. So that's why it's so important that we educate adults to know the facts about child sexual abuse, to know that the majority of children are abused by someone known to them or known to their family, to make sure that people know how pervasive it is, and then to know what policies should be put in place in organizations, one adult, one child policies to limit that kind of contact, so that parents and caregivers are asking the questions of institutions that hold institutions accountable for the care of children.
Give me some more examples of those questions, because I think parents are unsure about how to go about spotting trouble. Yeah. Sometimes we have that thing. Women have that thing, that instinct, that intuition, and instinct, and we don't listen to it.
You're absolutely right. So one of the things that Dr. Brown mentioned was when you're teaching children language, also teach them not to ignore their instincts.
Yeah.
Sometimes, kids don't want to hug people, or kids say, I don't want to go over that person's house, or I don't want to be around. And we have to honor our children's voices and honor those instincts, because sometimes they're trying to tell us something, and they can't tell us directly, but they're trying to tell us that person makes them uncomfortable for some reason. And we have to not continue to push our adult ways on them sometimes. I like to say that good parenting can be incredibly inconvenient, because you gotta roll at your kid's pace. And as Dr. Brown said, if you see a change in behavior, in order to see a change in behavior, you have to know a child. You have to be interacting with them and listening to them and watching them. And that's how you spot a change in behavior, because you know that child. You know there's something different about them. And then by educating adults about the clues of child sexual abuse, they'll know what to look for. They'll know what questions to ask. So we really love the fact that you're having this conversation and with all these distinguished folk today and bringing these different voices, because this is what we need to do as a community. We have to keep talking about it. We can't just talk about it when a trial is underway, like last year when the Sandusky trial was underway, or when there's something in the newspaper, because that's how public attention seems to go with this issue. And yet we know from our work that the children keep coming and the cases keep coming, whether or not they're headlines. So if we as a community are really committed to stopping this problem, we will keep having this conversation.
And Dr. Brown, talk about the danger of making your child hug Uncle Joey when he or she does not want to. If Uncle Joey comes around often and your child is acting a certain way, I can see a parent wanting to make sure their child is respectful,
right,
when your child is saying to you, this is not a safe situation.
Right. I mean, again, as Michelle said, you have to respect their intuition, their feelings about things. If you do press it, I mean, it could be a case where they start to question their own feelings, and then they don't follow their own intuition. And when they're in serious situations, they don't follow what they know to be correct or know to be kind of a dangerous situation. So I think overall, as parents, again, as a part of supporting them, it's important to go with it, even from the young babies. I mean, having a young child myself, I know that, you are, a lot of times our babies, we want to hand our babies over to someone, but there are some people that she will just, start crying instantly, and you don't know what it is, but there's something that they feel, and to honor that is very important, and to teach them to honor that in themselves and to go with that gut reaction.
Our children need to be empowered. We have to empower them.
And have confidence.
Roger, making inroads in these institutions where predators lurk. It's a tough one. In religious communities, you break down how you guys have been able to get inside, or still are you outside trying to get in and knocking outside and banging?
We're trying. It's getting better. It's getting better everywhere. Couple things on this topic, and I appreciate it. It's a great question. First things first, institutions don't generate or create predators, they merely attract them.
That's a good point. Say it again, please.
The reason I say that, sure, institutions do not create predators, they merely attract them. It's an important point to make because many of the institutions where predators go, where they do flock, are institutions that we correctly value, that we believe in, that we support for the right reasons. Religious institutions that have, of course, as everybody knows now, that the Catholic Church has been dealing with this crisis for 20 years in the media, of course, centuries before that as well. But one of the unfair characterizations of not only the Catholic Church, but every religious organization, because every religious organization deals with the same thing. And unfortunately, we find that the institutions that are more doctrinal, more authoritarian, that have less contact with the outside world, those are the kinds of places where predators are going to tend to be drawn. So a lot of times we'll say, oh, well, there must be something about this religion, or there must be something about the nature of being a priest, or there must be something about the fact that this religion is very conservative. That must be warping people, and it must be turning men and even some women into. No, that's not what's happening. The institution is fine. The religion is what it is. The belief is usually honorable. That of course depends on a person's perspective. But what's happening is if there is a predator within that midst, it's not because they were created by that tradition. It's just that they were either drawn to it or they were raised there. They stayed there because they have, institutions provide the three things that predatory people need. And that is basically a steady stream of trusting victims, a cover for what it is they are, a trusted police officer, a religious figure, a coach, whatever the cover
Scouting.
is. Exactly, yeah. Yeah, why, Bonnie and Clyde were once asked, I believe it was Bonnie and Clyde, why do you go to banks? That's where the money is. Well, if you ask a predator, why do you go to an organization where children are nurtured? It's because that's where the children are.
Right.
So a steady stream of trusting victims, a cover for what it is that they're doing. And then finally, and this is where the real kicker, they also need an institution that will protect them if they're detected and move them around. And that is the great tragedy of the Catholic Church in recent years, and also other religious institutions, scouting to a certain extent, institutions who, when they detect a predator in their midst, when instead of cooperating with civil authorities, exposing that person and saying this is not going to be tolerated here, and saying we made a mistake, Because but you can't screen out predatory people. There's no, as you say, there is an intuition sometimes that kicks in that's sometimes successful, but not always. Criminal background checks are not going to do it because criminal background checks most predators don't have criminal histories. Als was
They're
a
not
police
caught
officer.
many
Right,
times. Yeah.
Exactly, they're undetected. So, and there's no set of questions, there's no eye movement you can look for, there's just no way. Rather, every institution just has to make itself as unattractive to predators as possible. And the way it does that is by announcing to the world, these are our policies for safety, this is how we don't tolerate this, and we will cooperate with civil authorities in order to expose these individuals. But that's been difficult to do over time. And unfortunately, what we've seen over the decades and the centuries instead is that most institutions have turned within and attempted to cover it up and attempted to reduce the shame. And there was also some misunderstanding about the dynamics of offenders and over-reliance on things like psychotropic drugs and
how does it all work
therapy
when
and
your
things.
perpetrator is a police officer for someone like you trying to prosecute, and you've got someone within the law enforcement community, as in Al's case, victimizing?
Yeah, it's terrible for all the reasons that you can imagine. You have a jury pool that has to come to understand that this trusted individual within this trusted institution was actually committing crimes.
Yeah.
It's getting easier. I mean, again, because of popular culture, because of awareness, because of the courage of people like Al, because of the efforts of everybody here, it's getting easier to convince people, to get them to understand. And because of conversations like this, that it's getting easier. But it's still very, very difficult.
We're close to taking questions from the audience, but I do want to ask you, Michelle, and Dr. Brown, about the racial breakdown of victims. I know you guys have numbers, but in terms of the incidents involving African Americans or Hispanics or Caucasians, how does it all fan out?
Well, Dr. Brown may have more national data. I mean, in the District of Columbia, I can tell you in terms of the Children's Advocacy Center, the majority of children we see are children of color. But the number of children that we see and the number of reports don't necessarily reflect the victim breakdown. Remember, we're only seeing children where the cases are reported and come to people's attention. And often we think there's discrepancy and disparity in the way things are reported, the way things are interpreted. And so, like I said, at Safe Shores, the majority of children we see are children of color, which reflects the child population of the district.
Dr. Brown.
In regard to what Michelle said earlier, I think the national data mimics what we're seeing in D.C., and actually D.C. is a little bit higher than what we're seeing nationally. You see a lot in the African American community, the Hispanic community, and then the Caucasian community. However, it's disproportionately represented in the African American and Hispanic communities.
Yeah, let me just say on that point, we talked about the stats earlier. 1 in 4 or 5 girls before they're 18 and 1 in 6 boys before their 18th birthday are getting abused. That's a health crisis. That's an epidemic. And we got to address that and raise the awareness.
Absolutely.
And we talk about sexual abuse, so oftentimes it's more prevalent in females or it's more reported in females, but with physical abuse we find the opposite, that it's more in males. So I think, just to kind of keep in consideration all the different types of abuse, physical abuse, you see a lot more males coming forward and reporting that than you do females. Not to say that females aren't experiencing more physical abuse or males are not experiencing sexual abuse. It's just in terms of reporting. Exactly.
Yeah.
I can add to Al's point. I think the other piece is this crime is so pernicious because the stigma attaches to the victim. How many other crimes do we know where the victim is somehow blamed or treated as though they're complicit in the crime? And so that's the other reason it's so hard for them to come forward.
That's the word I use all the time in trying to explain why you could be quiet about it for so long. And it's the feeling of complicity. I feel complicit in the act. And
how else have you been able to come to terms with this? Have you gotten treatment? Have you gotten counseling, therapy?
Well, honestly, I attend several 12-step self-help groups, and that's helped me a tremendous amount because it's an open and honest group, and I give that a lot of credit. But the therapeutic value of one survivor helping another is just unparalleled, and that's what's helped me a lot. I have a lot of friends that are survivors, and we get together and meet, and some of my best friends, and also since I've come out about my abuse, so many other people. Former NFL players, have come to me and told me, "Hey, Al, I'm so glad you did that. That happened to me." And a lot of guys I grew up with in high school and junior high school. It's just amazing, and it blows me away. Even when I'm testifying before senators and women and men, and sometimes they come up to me afterwards in tears and say, hey, that
your
happened
courage
to me.
makes it okay
You
for
know,
others to come forward. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We want to turn to our studio audience now. They have been patiently waiting for a chance to ask a question or two. We do have microphones in the audience, so as you come forward, please remember we want you to state your name and your organization affiliate. Thank you so much. What's your name and your organization affiliation?
So I'm Dr. Cheryl Ann Boyce, and I'm a clinical psychologist here in D.C. and very proud to be president of the board of Safe Shores. And I thank the panel for their candid discussion of a difficult issue today.
Right. What's your question or comment here?
So the question is really to build upon what I think is still a hard issue for the field, which is men and child sexual abuse. So I want to know from the panel's perspective, what are the kind of things we can do in the community to reduce the stigma of boys and men who've experienced child sexual abuse. We have one example today, but I think there's still a need for parents in the community to really address this underserved population for child sexual abuse.
Great question. Who wants to take that first?
I can.
Dr. Brown.
I would say there's several things that can be done. First, I think making resources available so that when someone is ready to come forward, that there is a place for them to come forward to, whether it be to the parents or for others around. I think having conversations like we're having today are very important, so that it loses some of its sting, it loses some of the mystery. They'll know that there's other people out there that are experiencing similar issues. So I think having conversations about it are huge, as well as again noticing some kind of warning, looking at warning signs and being very attentive to behavioral changes and knowing the children in our lives.
And as you said earlier, Al, just your coming out with your story has allowed other men to tell their story.
Good point. Again, she mentioned men, and I could speak on that behalf. It is a good question. It's extremely hard to get something in place to try to draw them out to get help for themselves is a tough thing to do, but it's just a fact that we do have plenty of resources out there.
But speak to look, you're a black man, you're a big, strong black man. In many communities, in many cultures, in the athletic environment, you man up, right. Shake it off.
Right.
It's not a big deal. Mm-hmm. You're a man.
Right.
Get over it.
Right.
You had to fight through all of that. It took you a long time to navigate your way through what you had been told by other people in the community, even maybe by your parents.
Well, it did, but I don't want to take a lot of credit. I give God the credit, and pain was my great motivator. I suffered so much, and the dysfunctional behavior that goes along with childhood trauma and childhood sexual abuse, it manifested itself into self-medicating and other forms of dysfunctional behavior. And I mentioned the anger earlier, and all those things contributed to me coming out. I just wanted to help myself. I didn't know the key was freeing myself from that sick secret, that sick, dark secret of child abuse. I didn't know the relief that I would get from doing that, and that's one of the biggest things I would share with people who are holding it in, because it's going to cause you some grief down the road. You got to address the issue.
Before we get to the gentleman in the audience, Michelle, talk about the fact that in many communities, boys are labeled as troublemakers, and our black boys get that label
early on.
And so when they are acting out, it is just seen as an extension of being a black kid. And so we have to really open our eyes. As you said earlier, know your child, but you need to really understand that this is not a black kid or a minority kid thing that they're acting out. Maybe there is something deeper going on.
There can be. I mean, that change in behavior is key. But I think, to go to Dr. Boyce's question, one of the things that we can do as a community is get educated. And remember that children our children for a really long time. We try to push children to grow up really fast, and the fact is we know their brains don't finish developing until they're 25 years old. So let's stop trying to make children grown. Let's remember that boys and girls are children and are vulnerable to perpetrators, and stop doing that distinction between boys being tough.
Right.
Because boys need to be nurtured and cared for and treated tenderly, just like girls do. So just from a very pragmatic standpoint, as parents and adults, we've got to remember that we should rear boys and girls the same way. There's no boy way to rear a child, no girl way in terms of those things. And the other piece is we know through educating adults that we can change adult behavior. There's an excellent curriculum called Stewards of Children, which we offer at Safe Shores, and it's offered all around the country. It's evidence supported, and it teaches adults how to recognize, respond to, and prevent child sexual abuse. So there are steps that we can take as a community to get smarter about this.
Very good resources. Let me go to the gentleman in the audience. Your name and your organization affiliation.
Omar Bell. I actually serve as on the board of directors for a center for Alexandria's Children in Alexandria, Virginia, another CAC, as well as the international organization Male Survivor, and am a survivor actually myself of childhood sexual abuse. So thank you so much for you all being here today. I'm sort of curious to further the conversation as to how you begin to help, specifically in the African American male community, release some of the stigma. I know that for me, even when I disclosed to my family years ago, and much like yourself, Al, as an athlete, that was my outlet. You could be angry, and everyone, that was great, and that type of thing. But even within disclosing within my family, there was the sort of feeling of, well, these things happen. Well, we don't really necessarily talk about it. Everybody knows somebody that had the Uncle Joe or the so-and-so around the way. And I'd be curious to hear from you sort of what your experience has been specific to African-American males and helping to sort of bring it more out of the shadows, because you're so right that silence is what allows it to continue to go forward.
Well, that's a great question, and it's tough for me to answer because I have a very loving, large family, and I love all my brothers and sisters. They're very supportive, but in this case, I didn't feel, just like yourself, it was just tough to get their support, and they're very educated people, and I love them dearly, but they just, were raised by the same parents I was. We were just taught to be tough, keep a seat, get through it, and just put it on the back burner. And this is just a devastating trauma that we suffered as kids, and it's going to manifest itself in some way if you don't deal with it. And it did in my life until I dealt with it. And I admire you for being a survivor also. Thank you for sharing your story. And I don't have all the answers, and I certainly don't have the answer to that one, because it pains me that, 6 years later, they're very supportive now, but they had to learn too, and
they had to come to terms with
it because it was a shock to them. They had no idea that I was abused, and it's a tough issue because I didn't have the courage to tell them, and we're a very close family. I love them dearly. I can't say that enough. They're tremendous people, and I'm just so honored to have them as siblings.
Yeah, and I would think, Dr. Brown, that when parents find out or other siblings find out, they take on a level of guilt and shame and feeling that they let down their child. So they go through a range of emotions as well.
Definitely. I think I'm thinking back to several cases, the parents, especially if they had no idea in themselves, when they hear, they're almost as devastated, as a child may have been, because they're blaming themselves for all the different ways that they should have noticed it or should have seen what was happening, could have stopped it. And I think that's why the treatments that are more supported tackle that and incorporate parents into treatments and help them to understand and to deal with their thought patterns and kind of the guilt that they have surrounding it as well, in addition to working with the children.
Yeah.
So I think you're definitely right. The family goes through their own process in dealing with it, and sometimes it's denial initially.
Yes.
But then once they accept it, it's all the guilt and what could I have done or why didn't I notice it? Those types of questions.
Did you ever face anyone out in your family who didn't believe you?
Well, it wasn't so much they didn't believe me. It's just that it was kind of hurtful because it was okay as long as Al Chesley on the tackle. Al Chesley's doing great, and But I understand it's a shock to them. They just didn't know that this has happened. Some stranger, in my case, I didn't tell them. They found out through the newspaper, so that's tough on them. And so I felt that it wasn't fair to them to receive it that way. I wish I could have told them, but what had happened when I came out about my abuse, I was out of town, and before I got back to Washington, it was in the Washington Post, this media today, I don't have to speak on that. Here we are, but, I'm glad it happened that way, because I like to say God did for me what I couldn't do for myself. If my mom and dad were alive, I know they'd be proud of what I'm doing, but I wouldn't have had the courage to probably come out and talk about it, because it's just that tough of a thing to do. I wouldn't want to hurt them or want them to feel any pain, and it sounds weird, but those are the dynamics that we go through as survivors.
I know there is this responsibility among teachers and law enforcement and professionals who suspect possible child abuse. But when a parent finds out that this is happening or has happened, and their child is still, in the grips of the trauma, the treatment aspect, getting that child into treatment is so key and important. And I don't want to leave this discussion without addressing why this is key, because can we get through this?
Well, you raise a great point, and I think Mr. Bell and Al are testament to the fact that people can heal from child sexual abuse. We know that with proper intervention, with support, and timely and appropriate mental health services, children can heal, their families can heal, because this doesn't just devastate the child. If the child does disclose as a child, there's often a devastating impact on the family. But we have professionals who are skilled at treating children who've been subject to abuse or other trauma, and we know that there are interventions, mental health interventions, various kinds of therapy that can really set people on the path to healing. So that's, I think, a key message in terms of encouraging people to come forward, is that with appropriate intervention, you can heal and go on and thrive in life.
Yeah. And add on to that, because without, Dr. Brown, the proper treatment, counseling, therapy for the child, for the family, for everybody impacted by this, what are we looking at in terms of devastation in a family?
Right. There are numerous short-term effects, with regard to grades, academic decline, behavioral patterns, such as high-risk behaviors that they start to engage in, difficulties relating to others, and things of that nature. And then you have the long-term effects, which again can lead to earlier use of drugs and alcohol, can be even medical. So it's been related to cardiac and metabolic conditions as well. So I think you not only have short-term things to look at, but long-term effects that also play a role, and if not treated, can really wreak havoc and have a heavy burden on the adult.
We'll go back to the audience in just a second. Roger, let me ask you, are law enforcement officials better educated on the seriousness of, the child's psyche or mental state? How do you think law enforcement is doing at being better educated generally?
Well, we've got a long way to go.
In terms of how to handle the child when they...
Absolutely, yeah. The short answer is we've got a long way to go, but we are making progress. And it is the multidisciplinary team concept within the Child Advocacy Center. And thank you, Al. I was actually on the initial steering committee. I was an assistant Commonwealth attorney in Alexandria when we were starting to put that CAC together, and I'm so proud. I had very little to do with it, but I'm so proud of how far it's come. So that model is the best hope that we have, because that's when you have the psychologists who understand the dynamics in the background are working with the medical folks who understand that part of it. That's the best hope we have, and thankfully that model is proliferating quite a bit.
That's good to know. All right, next in our audience, a young lady in the green, your name and your affiliation, and your question or comment.
Hi, my name is Centauria Carter, and I'm also a proud member of Safe Shores Board. My question is very practical. How? Where do we go? What do we do? How do we go about reporting suspected abuse?
Thank you for that.
Well, in the District of Columbia, you can call 202-671-SAFE, S-A-F-E, and that is the child abuse hotline in the District of Columbia. So that's one way. You can report to the police department. Those are the main ways to make sure that there is some type of investigative follow-up.
One thing I'd like to add to that, the bigger problem actually we have is with mandated reporters who are still not reporting.
So medical professionals.
And
Teachers,
medical
coaches,
professionals, exactly,
anybody who works
coaches,
with
anybody, under laws that have changed drastically in recent years, certain individuals who have regular contact with children professionally or semi-professionally are mandated reporters, as I'm sure you know. And we have a real problem with, we're getting a little bit better with education, but when you do confidential surveys of certain mandated reporters, a lot of them admit to not reporting even when they have that reason. And understanding the definition, it has to be sort of understood, and it can be difficult to nail it down. But there are individuals who are mandated reporters who will admit, even when they have a reasonable suspicion, they don't report. Well, it seems like it is, but they get doubts. They wonder, if I'm wrong, what's the effect on this person? There are a lot of things, and there are some people that flat out just don't want to be involved. So as much as we need to get the community involved, we also need to focus on the people that are already mandated and yet hesitating to do what it is that they need to do.
Good point.
So
Thank
you asked earlier about what questions should parents ask.
Sure.
That's one of those questions. If in terms of a school or an institution, what are your policies around reporting? What are your internal policies? Right. So that's good to know, because sometimes people think if they tell their superior or their supervisor that they're absolved from their legal obligation to report, and they're not.
Yeah, and we saw that in the Jerry Sandusky case. Let's take your question or comment. First, your name and where are you from?
Hi, I'm Nicole Thomas. I'm a student here at Howard University. I would like to talk about, there's a lot of sexual abuse amongst kids and families. And one of my best friends just went through this. Her 13-year-old nephew was molesting her 3-year-old his 3-year-old cousin, which is her 3-year-old niece. And so they're battling within the family because some family members doesn't want it to get out, some family members want to tell, so it's kind of tearing their family apart. So just, I guess, what do you guys suggest for that kind of situation?
Wow. So there are cases that we see at the Children's Advocacy Center.
And she's talking about a child victimizing
Well, we
another
talked about how child
Yeah.
sexual abuse can be one minor on another minor when they exert power over them.
Yeah.
So this is a really difficult situation. But one, that 3-year-old get that 3-year-old treatment and support. Right. Make sure that they're getting what they need, and then that 13-year-old, I think there's something to be looked at there. Why is he doing that? Right. That child needs treatment and support as well. And maybe that child was victimized and nobody intervened on that child's behalf. So there are two issues there, but both of those children have needs that need to be addressed. I think the other key issue that raises is supervision. Again, it goes back to adults, what's our responsibility, and when you can't necessarily leave children in other children's care, right? You can't step away and just kind of abdicate that responsibility. So again, it's inconvenient, but it's our job to protect children. And so again, you got to watch who you're leaving your child with, even within your own family sometimes.
I think it's important to note, Dr. Brown, that as Michelle said, when a child is acting out in that sexual way, there's often other forms of abuse there too.
Right, and as she said, they're often victims of child abuse themselves. So looking deeper at what's going on with that child, trying to not just treat them as a perpetrator, but see what we can do for them as possibly a victim themselves, and if not a victim, why are they acting that way? What's going on? What can we do to support that child? Because they are still a child, but in the same vein, they have committed something that is so disturbing to most of us that I think we forget that we need to help them as well.
We just have a few minutes left, so we want to take the time that we have left to get some final thoughts from our panelists. Dr. Brown, I'll have you start. How should we leave this conversation? What do you want us to take away?
Right, I feel like there's so much to say. I guess an important piece to keep in mind is that there is help. There is a way for families and victims to heal and to not be afraid to come forward to receive that help, and for those who are in the midst and around children to be very vigilant, to try and be more vigilant and err on the side of reporting as opposed to being more conservative.
And let me go right next door to Roger here. As the prosecutor, a former prosecutor, and a person who trains and counsels folks on setting up these teams, what do you want to say to end this conversation?
Just that the support from the community for child advocacy centers is probably the most positive and healthy thing that can be done right now. No matter how much support there is governmentally, those budgets are always tight, and not just money, but time and effort, and just the more the community pours into the CAC, the more the community is going to get out of it in terms of a safer environment. So I would leave with that thought, probably more than any other one. It's a valiant effort, and it deserves the community's full support.
Al, if I may, I'd like to leave you for the end, and have Michelle Booth Cole to give us some final thoughts now.
Well, I mean, this is a crime that thrives, as Alice said, in silence. And so, to me, the way we end it is to stop the silence and to keep having these conversations.
We have to, because this is a big, big, big problem.
Yeah.
Al Chesley, thank you so much for your honesty. Your final thoughts, what do you want to leave us with?
Well, thank you for having me. It's been an honor to be here. And I just want to say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Teach your kids about inappropriate touching. It's important. Have that dialogue with them. Communication is key. And I'm just glad we could raise the level of awareness and be conscious of your kids. To the parents out there, just watch your kids, listen to them, and watch their behaviors a little closer. When they're acting out and getting in fights or hurting other people, you want to try to find out where that's coming from. And last but not least, let's not wait till another big travesty like the Sandusky case. Unfortunately for those victims, they suffered up there at the hands of a predator, a horrible predator, a coach. But that event raised so much awareness, and let's just keep the awareness level where it is, and more people are aware of what's going on with our kids. And remember, this is a public health crisis going on today, right now, 2013. And support all the good causes out there, the rape crisis centers. And last but not least, it's never too late to get help.
Absolutely. And the conversation, as you said, Michelle, earlier, should not stop when the trial starts. Mm-hmm. We've got to keep talking about this. We are out of time, though, but we do want this conversation on this very important topic to continue in your homes and in your communities. So for more information on this program, please go to our website, www.whut.org. I want to thank our guests once again for being with us and sharing your experiences and, of course, your expertise on this topic. And a special thanks to Safe Shores and Leadership Washington for their support for this program. Until next time, goodbye, and thank you for watching.